The evening shift at the downtown precinct started like any other. Officer Wilson sat at his desk, sipping his third coffee of the day, while his partner Officer Rivera sorted through paperwork from their previous cases. The autumn wind whistled outside their windows, carrying the first hints of the approaching winter. The radio crackled to life, breaking the mundane silence of the office. Unit 247, we have a call from the McDonald's on Pine Street. Caller reports a suspicious person causing disturbance. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but carried a subtle urgency that both officers had learned to recognize over their years on the force. Wilson grabbed his keys, exchanging a knowing look with Rivera. They'd received countless similar calls before, and too often they turned out to be nothing more than someone's prejudices masquerading as concern. Copy that, dispatch. Unit 247 responding, Wilson replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience. As they walked to their patrol car, Rivera couldn't shake off an uneasy feeling. You know, she said, adjusting her body camera, these calls have been increasing lately. Remember last week? That kid was just waiting for his mom outside the grocery store. Wilson nodded, his face showing a mix of concern and resignation. Yeah, and the week before that, it was that college student studying in the park. We need to handle this one carefully. The recent media coverage of police interactions with minorities weighed heavily on their minds as they pulled out of the station. The drive to McDonald's was short but tense. Through the windshield, they could see the golden arches glowing against the darkening sky. The restaurant sat at a busy intersection, its windows bright with fluorescent light, showing the usual evening crowd of families and teenagers grabbing dinner. As they parked, dispatch radioed again with more details. The caller was a regular customer, an elderly woman who claimed someone was acting suspicious and probably stealing. The description she provided was vague, but pointed to a young black girl sitting alone. Inside their car, Rivera took a deep breath. Let's get the body cams checked, she said, tapping her equipment. Wilson did the same, ensuring everything was recording properly. These precautions had become second nature in recent years, protecting both officers and civilians alike. Before stepping out, Wilson turned to his partner. Remember our training. We observe first, then approach only if necessary. No assumptions. Rivera nodded in agreement, her expression serious. They'd both seen how quickly these situations could spiral out of control if not handled properly. The parking lot was half full, with cars coming and going through the drive-thru. A group of high school students lounged near the entrance, laughing and sharing fries. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. But somewhere inside, someone had decided that a young person's presence was threatening enough to warrant calling the police. As they approached the entrance, they could see their reflections in the glass doors. 2 officers, one black and one Hispanic, about to investigate a call that struck uncomfortably close to home for both of them. They'd both faced similar prejudices in their own lives, making this type of call particularly challenging to handle. The automatic doors slid open, bringing with them the familiar smell of French fries and the sound of casual dinner conversations. Several customers looked up, their expressions changing at the sight of police uniforms. Some reached for their phones, while others pretended not to notice, focusing intently on their meals. Near the counter, an elderly woman waved them over eagerly. She wore a floral print dress and clutched her purse tightly, her face showing relief at their arrival. Behind her, other customers watched with varying degrees of interest and concern, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifting noticeably. Wilson and Rivera exchanged one final glance before walking over to speak with the caller. They both knew that what happened next would depend not just on their actions, but on their ability to see beyond the prejudices that had brought them here in the first place. The McDonald's dining area buzzed with the usual evening activity, but there was an undercurrent of tension as Officer Wilson and Officer Rivera made their way through the restaurant. The elderly woman who had called them pointed toward a corner booth, where a teenage girl sat alone, surrounded by textbooks and a laptop. The girl couldn't have been more than 16. She wore a neat school uniform, a blue blazer with a school crest, and her hair was pulled back in a neat braid. Her focus was entirely on her studies, occasionally pausing to take small bites from her burger or sip her drink. Nothing about her behavior suggested anything remotely suspicious. "That's her," the elderly woman whispered, her voice carrying an edge of certainty that made both officers uncomfortable. She's been sitting there for hours. Nobody spends that much time in a McDonald's unless they're up to something. The woman clutched her purse tighter, her knuckles turning white. Rivera noticed other customers beginning to take notice. A young man in the corner had his phone out, likely recording. A mother pulled her children closer, watching the scene unfold with worried eyes. The restaurant staff behind the counter exchanged concerned glances, unsure whether to intervene. The officers approached the girl's table carefully, trying not to draw more attention than necessary. The teenager looked up from her textbook, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of their uniforms. Despite her obvious surprise, she remained composed, sitting up straighter in her seat. "Good evening," Wilson said, keeping his voice gentle and professional. "We're just here to ask you a few questions. How are you doing tonight?" He noticed her advanced placement chemistry textbook and several carefully organized notebooks spread across the table. "I'm fine, thank you," the girl replied politely, her voice steady despite the situation. "Is something wrong?" Her hands remained visible on the table, one holding a highlighter, the other resting near her paper cup. Years of experience told both officers this wasn't the body language of someone causing trouble. Rivera glanced at the girl's laptop screen. It showed a virtual tutoring platform, with math equations visible in one corner. "We received a complaint about someone spending an unusual amount of time here," she explained, already feeling the weight of the situation's absurdity. The girl's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, then to a resigned sadness that seemed far too mature for her age. "I come here every Tuesday and Thursday after school," she explained. "The Wi-Fi is reliable, and it's quieter than the library. I'm part of an online tutoring program." As if to confirm her words, a young voice came from her laptop speakers. "Are you still there? I'm stuck on problem number 4. The girl glanced at her screen, where a younger student waited in the virtual classroom. The elderly complainant had moved closer, still watching intently. Other customers had their phones out now, the soft clicks of camera shutters mixing with the restaurant's background music. The situation was becoming a spectacle, exactly what the officers had hoped to avoid. "She's lying," the elderly woman interjected loudly, causing several heads to turn. "No one studies in a McDonald's. She must be planning something." Her voice carried through the restaurant, drawing more attention to the increasingly tense scene. The girl's composure cracked slightly, her hands trembling as she closed her textbook. "I can show you my student ID," she offered quietly, reaching for her backpack. The movement caused the elderly woman to gasp dramatically and step backward. "Don't let her reach for anything," the woman exclaimed, her voice shrill with manufactured fear. The outburst created a ripple of murmurs through the restaurant. More phones appeared, recording the scene. The situation was rapidly spinning out of control. Wilson and Rivera exchanged a quick glance, years of partnership allowing them to communicate without words. They were trapped in an impossible situation: ignore the increasingly hysterical complainant and risk escalation, or take action against a clearly innocent student and risk becoming another viral video of police overreach. The restaurant manager finally approached, a middle-aged woman with concern etched on her face. "She's a regular customer," she began, but the elderly woman cut her off with another accusation, this one even louder than before. The girl sat perfectly still now, her hands flat on the table, her eyes focused straight ahead. She'd clearly seen similar scenarios play out before, maybe on the news, maybe in her own life. The resignation in her expression spoke volumes about experiences no teenager should have to face. Rivera noticed the girl's school crest. It was from one of the city's most prestigious prep schools, the same school where the officer's niece had recently received a scholarship. The absurdity of the situation grew with each passing moment, but protocol and the escalating tension demanded they take some kind of action. As more customers gathered around and phone cameras continued recording, the officers faced a decision that would affect not just their careers, but the very fabric of trust between law enforcement and the community they served. The weight of that choice hung in the air like a physical presence, as heavy as the prejudice that had brought them there in the first place. The tension in the McDonald's had reached a breaking point. The girl's laptop still showed the tutoring session, with the young student's voice occasionally breaking through. "Hello? Are you still there?" The sound only added to the growing discomfort in the restaurant. Officer Rivera felt her heart sink as she watched Officer Wilson reach for his handcuffs. They'd both silently hoped to avoid this moment, but the elderly woman's increasingly loud accusations and the growing crowd left them with few options. Protocol dictated they respond to the complaint, even though every instinct told them they were making a terrible mistake. "I'm going to need you to stand up slowly," Wilson said, his voice heavy with reluctance. The girl's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded, her movements careful and deliberate. She'd clearly seen enough news stories to know exactly how to behave in this situation, a fact that made the whole scene even more heartbreaking. The restaurant had fallen completely silent except for the soft peeping of the kitchen equipment and the muffled sounds of traffic outside. Even the elderly complainant had stopped talking, watching with an expression that mixed satisfaction with something that almost looked like doubt. As the girl stood, her school blazer shifted, revealing a silver pin on her lapel. Rivera noticed it immediately. It was a Presidential Scholar Award, one of the highest honors a high school student could receive. The same pin her nephew had worked so hard to earn last year. The absurdity of the situation grew even more apparent. "Wait," called out the restaurant manager, stepping forward again. "This isn't right. She's been coming here for months. She's never caused any trouble." But procedure had already taken over, and the manager's words seemed to float away into the tense air. The girl turned around slowly, her hands behind her back. As Wilson began to secure the handcuffs, she spoke softly, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "My tutoring student is still online. Could someone please let them know I'll have to reschedule?" The simple request, so polite and thoughtful even in this moment, made several onlookers turn away, unable to watch. Through the restaurant windows, more people had gathered outside. Word had spread quickly, and phones were recording through the glass. Someone in the crowd held up a hastily made sign reading, "Stop Police Harassment." The situation was rapidly becoming exactly the kind of incident that both officers had wanted to prevent. The young man who had been recording since the beginning stood up, his phone still aimed at the scene. "This is going straight to social media," he announced, his voice shaking with anger. "Everyone needs to see this." An honor student being arrested for studying while black. Officer Rivera noticed something else as they prepared to escort the girl out, a small badge on her backpack that read Volunteer Tutor of the Year. The backpack also held several textbooks, all advanced placement level, their pages marked with neat sticky notes. Everything about this student screamed dedication and hard work, not suspicious behavior. The elderly woman who had started it all now stood slightly apart from the crowd, her earlier certainty seeming to waver as she watched the handcuffs being secured. Perhaps she was finally seeing the situation for what it really was, but it was too late to take back her accusations. A young employee behind the counter couldn't hold back her tears. "She helps my little brother with math," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent restaurant. "She's here twice a week, every week. She never bothers anyone." The words hung in the air, a testament to the tragic misunderstanding unfolding before them. As they began walking toward the door, the girl held her head high, maintaining a dignity that belied her years. She didn't cry or protest, but her quiet strength made the situation even more powerful. Several customers had tears in their eyes, and even Wilson's hand trembled slightly as he guided her forward. Outside, the crowd had grown larger. News travels fast in the age of social media, and people from the surrounding businesses had gathered to witness what was happening. Some held up their phones, others just watched in silent disapproval. The evening air had grown colder, but nobody seemed to notice. Rivera opened the patrol car's back door, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her. As she helped the girl into the car, she noticed something that made her stomach turn. A medical textbook had fallen from the girl's backpack. On its cover was a note, "Future Doctor's Study Guide." The simple dream of a dedicated student now potentially tarnished by this moment. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as the car door closed. Some began chanting shame, while others pulled out their phones to call local news stations. What had started as a simple complaint had transformed into a moment that would likely dominate social media and local headlines for days to come. As they prepared to drive away, both officers knew this incident would have repercussions far beyond this evening. The image of a bright young student being led away in handcuffs for simply trying to study would stick with everyone who witnessed it. The truth would come out eventually, but the damage to community trust might never be fully repaired. Within hours of the arrest, the video had spread like wildfire across social media. People shared it with angry comments, and local news stations picked up the story. The McDonald's parking lot, usually quiet by late evening, had become the center of an impromptu community gathering. A local pastor stood on a plastic chair, addressing the growing crowd. "This has to stop," his voice carried over the murmur of the gathered people. "Our children can't even study in peace anymore." Around him, people nodded and raised their phones, live-streaming his words to thousands more watching online. Inside the restaurant, the young employee who had spoken up about the girl tutoring her brother was being interviewed by a local news reporter. "She's here every week, helping kids with their homework," she explained, wiping tears from her eyes. "She never asks for anything in return. She just wants to help others succeed." The elderly woman who had made the initial complaint had long since left, but her impact remained. The restaurant manager was showing security footage to another news crew, pointing out how the girl had been quietly studying for hours before the police arrived. "She's one of our best customers," the manager said, her voice tight with emotion. "She always cleans up after herself and helps other students who come here." Outside, more people continued to arrive. Parents brought their children, some holding handmade signs with messages like, "Education is not a crime, and let her study." A group of high school students wearing the same uniform as the arrested girl had gathered near the entrance, their faces showing a mix of anger and fear. One of these students spoke to a reporter, her voice shaking but determined. "That could have been any of us. We all come here to study sometimes. The Wi-Fi is good, and it's a safe place, or at least we thought it was." Behind her, other students nodded in agreement, some holding their school books close to their chests. Social media exploded with hashtags demanding justice. Local community leaders began calling for an investigation into the arrest. The police department's social media accounts were flooded with comments and questions. People shared similar stories of being harassed while going about their daily lives, turning the incident into a rallying cry for change. A local civil rights attorney arrived at the scene, speaking with witnesses and gathering information. "This is a clear case of racial profiling," she announced to the gathered crowd. "A young honor student was arrested for simply trying to better herself and help others. We won't let this stand." The crowd had grown to include people from all walks of life. An elderly man leaned on his cane, tears in his eyes as he watched the protests unfold. "I've been fighting this fight for 60 years, he told anyone who would listen. When will it end? When will people learn to see beyond color?" Inside the McDonald's, the tutoring platform on the girl's abandoned laptop finally timed out, the screen going dark. Her textbooks and notes remained scattered on the table, untouched since her arrest. A young boy pointed to the books as he walked past with his mother. "Mom, those are the same books my tutor uses," he said. "She helps me every Thursday too." News helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights illuminating the growing crowd. Local business owners from nearby shops brought water and snacks for the protesters. A sense of community solidarity began to emerge from the initial shock and anger. The restaurant's regular customers shared their stories with reporters. An elderly man spoke about how the girl had helped his grandson improve his grades. A working mother talked about seeing the girl share her food with a homeless person last week. Each story painted a picture of a young person dedicated to making her community better. As night fell, people lit candles, creating a warm glow in the parking lot. Someone started singing, "We Shall Overcome," and others joined in. The moment highlighted how a simple act of prejudice had united an entire community in protest and support. Local teachers arrived after hearing about their students' arrest. They brought grade reports and achievement certificates, physical proof of the girl's character that made the situation even more tragic. "She's ranked first in her class," one teacher told the news cameras. "She's the kind of student who makes you proud to be an educator." Social justice organizations began mobilizing their resources, promising to stand with the family through any legal proceedings. Local college students organized a study-in protest, planning to fill every McDonald's in the city with students doing homework in solidarity. As midnight approached, the crowd showed no signs of dispersing. The incident had touched a nerve, bringing to the surface long-simmering tensions about race, policing, and the right to exist without suspicion in public spaces. What had started as one woman's prejudiced complaint had become a moment of reckoning for the entire community. At the police station, Officer Rivera sat at her desk, staring at the girl's student ID. Something about it had caught her attention, not just the prestigious school name or the perfect attendance stamp, but a small designation in the corner. Her eyes widened as realization dawned. The booking process had been routine until that moment. The girl sat quietly in the holding area, still maintaining her composure, though her eyes betrayed her worry. She hadn't asked for special treatment or made any calls, simply requesting that someone inform her tutoring students that she wouldn't make their sessions this week. "Hey," Rivera called to her partner, her voice urgent. "You need to see this." Wilson walked over, coffee in hand, his face showing the strain of the evening's events. He leaned over her shoulder to look at the ID card she held up to the light. Under the student's photo was a small gold seal, the kind reserved for children of city officials and distinguished community leaders. Rivera quickly typed the girl's information into the database, and both officers felt their hearts sink as the results appeared on the screen. "She's a judge's daughter," Wilson whispered, coffee forgotten in his hand. "Not just any judge." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew Judge Thompson's reputation. He was not only one of the most respected figures in the city's legal system, but also a fierce advocate for education reform and youth programs. The night shift captain walked over, drawn by their intense focus on the computer screen. "What have you got?" he asked, then fell silent as he read the information. The quiet that followed was heavy with the weight of what they'd discovered. Rivera pulled up the girl's academic record, which had been automatically linked to her ID. Perfect grades, president of the science club, founder of a peer tutoring program that had helped dozens of struggling students improve their grades. The girl they'd arrested wasn't just an ordinary student, she was an exemplary one. More details emerged as they dug deeper. The tutoring sessions at McDonald's weren't random, they were part of a structured program she'd created herself. She chose the location because it was accessible by public transport and provided a comfortable, neutral space for students who might feel intimidated meeting at the library or school. Security footage from McDonald's began arriving, requested as part of the investigation. Months of recordings showed the same pattern. The girl arriving after school, setting up her books, spending hours helping younger students understand complex subjects. She often bought food for those who couldn't afford it, never drawing attention to her generosity. The elderly complainant's statement started to unravel under scrutiny. When asked for specific suspicious behaviors, she could only point to the girl's presence and the length of time spent in the restaurant. The manager's statement painted a completely different picture, one of a dedicated student who had become a positive fixture in the community. Officer Rivera found something else in the girl's backpack. A letter of recommendation for a prestigious summer medical program. The envelope was still sealed, but the return address belonged to one of the city's top hospitals, the same hospital where Rivera's sister worked as a nurse. The night shift captain made some calls, his face growing more concerned with each conversation. The story had already reached the mayor's office. Social media was exploding with outrage, and national news networks were picking up the story. What had started as a routine complaint was rapidly becoming a major incident. Wilson reviewed the body camera footage, his face grim. Every moment confirmed what they now knew: they had arrested an innocent student for the crime of being black in public. The footage showed her dignity in the face of injustice, her concern for her students even as she was being handcuffed. The station's phones wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted statements, community leaders demanded answers, and social media influencers were calling for action. The pressure was building, but more importantly, the truth was becoming clearer with each passing minute. In the holding area, the girl had finally dozed off, her head resting against the wall. A half-finished physics homework assignment lay on the bench beside her. She'd asked for permission to work on it while she waited. Even in custody, her focus on education never wavered. Rivera gathered all the evidence: the ID card, the academic records, the security footage, and the witness statements. She organized it carefully, knowing that what happened next would depend on how they presented these facts. The truth needed to be clear and undeniable. The night shift captain made one final call. "Get Judge Thompson on the line," he said, his voice heavy with responsibility. "And someone find that girl a proper desk to finish her homework. The least we can do is not let this incident affect her studies." The simple humanity of his request emphasized how far the situation had strayed from what justice should look like. The truth emerged like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. The elderly woman who had made the complaint arrived at the station, escorted by her daughter. Her face showed none of the earlier certainty that had caused so much trouble. Instead, she looked shaken, almost ill. "My mother just moved here last month," her daughter explained to the officers, her voice trembling. She didn't know. She had no idea that the girl she reported was the same person who's been tutoring my daughter online for the past 6 months. She pulled out her phone, showing text messages filled with her daughter's excitement about her amazing tutor who had helped her go from failing math to earning B's. The elderly woman sat heavily in a chair, her hands shaking as she held a tissue. "My granddaughter talks about her tutor all the time," she whispered. "How patient she is, how she explains things in a way that makes sense." I never made the connection. Her voice trailed off as the weight of her actions sank in. At that moment, the girl's father arrived at the station. Judge Thompson didn't storm in with anger or threats. Instead, he entered quietly, his dignity matching his daughter's. The officers watched as he hugged his daughter, checking if she was okay before addressing anyone else. The judge looked at his daughter's homework spread out on the desk they provided. "Even here, you're studying," he said softly, pride mixing with pain in his voice. "You never stop trying to learn, do you?" His daughter managed a small smile, the first since her arrest. Officer Rivera brought over the evidence they'd gathered. The security footage, the academic records, the testimonials from McDonald's staff and customers. The judge reviewed everything carefully, but his attention kept returning to the virtual tutoring platform still open on his daughter's laptop. "She started this program herself," he explained to the officers. "She saw how many students needed help but couldn't afford private tutors. So she created a free tutoring network using McDonald's because it was accessible to everyone." His voice carried no anger, only a deep sadness at how good intentions had led to this situation. The elderly woman's granddaughter had joined a video call, her young face appearing on the laptop screen. When she saw her tutor in the police station, she burst into tears. "You're the best teacher I've ever had," she sobbed. "Please don't stop helping me because of what my grandma did." The scene touched everyone in the room. The elderly woman approached the girl slowly, her earlier suspicion replaced by shame and regret. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I let my prejudices blind me. I never stopped to think, never bothered to look beyond what I assumed." More revelations followed. The girl had been using her allowance to buy food for students who couldn't afford it during their tutoring sessions. She'd created study guides for other subjects, sharing them freely with anyone who needed help. The McDonald's had become not just a tutoring center, but a place where students from all backgrounds could come together to learn. The night shift captain had been making calls all evening. As the full story emerged, the department's response shifted from damage control to something more meaningful. This incident couldn't be swept under the rug. It needed to become a catalyst for change. The elderly woman's daughter showed more messages from her phone, dozens of parents praising the young tutor who had helped their children improve not just their grades, but their confidence. "She never talks down to them," one message read. "She makes them believe they can succeed." Local news crews gathered outside the station, but instead of angry protesters, they found something unexpected. Students from the tutoring program had arrived, carrying their textbooks and homework. They set up an impromptu study session on the station steps, showing solidarity in the most appropriate way possible. The girl's father looked at the scene unfolding outside, then turned to the officers and the elderly woman. "We have 2 choices," he said. "We can let this incident divide us further, or we can use it to build something better." His words carried the weight of someone who had seen both justice and injustice in his years on the bench. Inside the station, the girl had returned to helping her student with math problems via video chat, as if being in a police station was just another day at McDonald's. Her dedication to teaching, even in these circumstances, spoke volumes about her character and reinforced the absurdity of her arrest. The elderly woman watched the tutoring session with new eyes, finally seeing what had been there all along, not a suspicious person, but a young leader making her community better one student at a time. The truth had come too late to prevent the arrest, but perhaps it wasn't too late to create something positive from this mistake. 3 months after the incident, the McDonald's on Pine Street looked very different. The same golden arches still glowed against the sky, but inside, something remarkable had taken shape. The corner where everything had started was now designated as the Community Learning Center, complete with better Wi-Fi, extra power outlets, and a small library of textbooks. The girl who had been wrongfully arrested sat at her usual table, but she wasn't alone. Officer Rivera sat across from her, helping a group of middle school students with science homework. Officer Wilson was at the next table, teaching basic computer skills to elderly community members, including the woman who had made the complaint that fateful night. "And that's how you can join your granddaughter's virtual tutoring session," Wilson explained patiently, showing the elderly woman how to use the laptop. She nodded, her eyes bright with excitement at the prospect of seeing her granddaughter learn. The same technology that had been part of the misunderstanding was now building bridges. The police department had transformed the incident into an opportunity for change. Instead of facing a lawsuit, they had worked with Judge Thompson to create a new community outreach program. Officers now regularly volunteered at the McDonald's, not to patrol, but to mentor and tutor alongside the students. "My test scores went up 20 points. A young student exclaimed, rushing into the restaurant with a paper clutched in his hand. He ran straight to his tutor, the same girl who had been handcuffed in this very spot. She gave him a high five, her face glowing with pride at his achievement. The restaurant manager had embraced the changes wholeheartedly. She had worked with the corporate office to implement the program in other locations across the city. What started as one student's initiative to help others had grown into a movement, spreading hope and opportunity throughout the community. The elderly woman who had made the complaint had become one of the program's strongest advocates. She shared her story at community meetings, using her mistake as a teaching moment about the dangers of prejudice and the importance of looking beyond first impressions. Her granddaughter's grades had improved so much that she was now tutoring younger students herself. Officer Rivera watched the scene with satisfaction. The department had made real changes in response to the incident. New training programs addressed implicit bias, and officers were encouraged to become involved in community education initiatives. The us versus them mentality was slowly being replaced by a spirit of cooperation and understanding. Judge Thompson had turned down offers to appear on national news shows. Instead, he focused on expanding the tutoring program, working with local businesses to provide resources and support. His daughter's arrest had sparked a conversation about race and justice, but it was the response to that incident that was creating lasting change. The girl herself had received college acceptance letters from top universities, all offering full scholarships. But more importantly, she had seen her vision of community education grow beyond anything she had imagined. The tutoring program now helped hundreds of students, with volunteers from all walks of life. "Next week, we're starting SAT prep classes," she announced to the gathered students. "And remember, everyone is welcome." She glanced at the wall where photos hung showing the program's success stories, students who had improved their grades, seniors who had learned to use computers, and officers who had become trusted mentors. The McDonald's had become more than just a fast food restaurant. It was a place where barriers broke down over shared meals and shared knowledge. The security cameras that had once recorded an injustice now captured scenes of community healing, students teaching elderly neighbors about smartphones, officers helping with homework, and people from all backgrounds learning from each other. Local businesses had joined the initiative. The bookstore down the street donated supplies, the coffee shop provided drinks for study sessions, and the tech store contributed refurbished laptops for students who needed them. What began as one person's dedication to helping others had rippled outward, touching countless lives. As the evening wound down, Officer Rivera watched the girl pack up her books. "You know," she said, "sometimes the best changes come from the hardest moments." The girl nodded, understanding that her arrest, though unjust, had sparked something powerful, a movement toward genuine understanding and connection. The last student left for the night, but the impact of what happened in this McDonald's would continue. The story of a wrongful arrest had become a story of transformation, proving that even the darkest moments could lead to light when people chose to learn from their mistakes and work together for change.